Eleanor wiped down the worn wooden counter of the small, cozy cafe that she had come to see as both a workplace and a refuge from the relentless pressures of life. Her movements steady despite the exhaustion that tugged at her muscles and the worries that never quite left her mind. A single mother, Eleanor carried the weight of providing for her young son Leo, who was her shining light amid the daily struggles. Leo was a kind-hearted boy, tender beyond his years, with eyes that mirrored the quiet strength and boundless love of his mother. Despite the endless challenges that came with working long hours as a waitress and stretching every dollar to make ends meet, Eleanor never allowed herself to lose sight of kindness, both toward others and herself. The cafe, nestled on a quiet corner of the city, was a humble place with chipped paint and mismatched chairs. But to Eleanor, it was a haven where she could serve warmth not just in the form of coffee and meals, but in the gestures of care that often went unnoticed. One cold autumn morning, the city wrapped in mist and the distant hum of traffic, Eleanor noticed an elderly man sitting quietly in the far corner of the cafe. He looked fragile, almost as if the world had been too harsh for his slight frame, his thin hands folded carefully in his lap as he gazed out the window, seemingly lost in thought. What struck Eleanor most was the loneliness etched into his face, a quiet sorrow that seemed to seep from every wrinkle and shadow. He had been there for hours without ordering anything, and though some customers began to glance uneasily in his direction, Eleanor's heart ached with a mix of empathy and a silent question. What had brought this man here, and why was he so alone? Leo, ever attentive, had noticed the same, and he tugged gently at Eleanor's sleeve. His small voice filled with concern. "Mom, maybe he's hungry." Eleanor nodded, sharing a glance that needed no words. Together, they decided to do something simple yet profound. Bring the elderly man a warm meal and a cup of tea, without asking for payment or explanation. This act, born from compassion rather than obligation, was Eleanor's quiet rebellion against the coldness that sometimes seeped into the world around her. When they approached the man's table, carrying the steaming bowl of soup and the delicate porcelain cup, he looked up slowly, surprise flickering in his tired eyes, quickly replaced by a fragile smile that spoke volumes of gratitude. The meal was more than just food. It was a balm for a loneliness that had settled deep within him after years of quiet neglect and distance from those he once loved. His name was Arthur, and as Eleanor and Leo sat beside him, he began to share the fragments of a life marked by joy and regret, a life shaped by the absence of his son, Richard. Arthur's voice was soft, almost hesitant at first, but as he spoke, the weight of his sorrow became clear. Richard, a man who had climbed the ladder of corporate success and now held the power and prestige of a CEO, had become distant, absorbed in his own world to the point that their relationship had all but dissolved. Arthur confessed that he had longed for reconciliation, but feared he was too old, too forgotten to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Eleanor listened with the kind of empathy that only comes from having faced her own hardships, understanding the ache of being disconnected from those you love. The cafe around them hummed softly with life, but in that corner time seemed to slow as stories were shared and silent tears exchanged. Just as Arthur prepared to leave, an unexpected figure appeared, the very son whose absence had left such a hollow ache in Arthur's heart. Richard entered the cafe, his sharp gaze scanning the room with a mixture of purpose and uncertainty. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his every step spoke of power and confidence, yet beneath the polished surface, there was a tension born of a secret mission. Richard had been sent by his father to observe, not to confront, but to understand, to gauge the nature of the people around him and, perhaps himself. Hidden from sight, Richard watched as Eleanor and Leo went about their work with genuine care, serving customers with a kindness that money could never buy, and most importantly, attending to Arthur with a respect and tenderness that had been absent from his own life. The sight stirred something deep within Richard, a realization that the success he had amassed was hollow without the warmth of human connection. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of regret, of yearning for a relationship he had long neglected in his relentless pursuit of ambition. Gathering courage, Richard stepped forward and approached the table where Eleanor, Leo, and Arthur sat. His apology was sincere, raw with vulnerability, as he expressed remorse for the distance and coldness that had fractured their family. The moment was delicate, a fragile dance of words and emotions like the first tentative buds of spring after a long winter. Eleanor, seeing the cracks in Richard's carefully constructed facade, extended her kindness without judgment, welcoming him not as a wealthy CEO but as a man seeking redemption and connection. Over time, this unlikely family began to weave themselves together through shared moments of laughter, tears, and quiet understanding. Richard's presence became a bridge not just to Arthur, but also to Eleanor and Leo, who embraced him with open hearts despite the differences in their worlds. Richard found himself drawn to the warmth that Eleanor and Leo radiated, an authenticity and strength that no boardroom could offer. He began to help Eleanor with her struggles, not from a sense of obligation but from a genuine desire to give back the love and support he had long neglected to seek and offer. Their story became a testament to the transformative power of compassion and forgiveness, proving that even the deepest divides could be mended by the simplest acts of kindness. In the small cafe, amid the rich aroma of coffee and the soft murmur of conversation, Eleanor, Leo, Arthur, and Richard discovered that family is not always defined by blood or circumstance but by the courage to open hearts, to heal wounds, and to build new beginnings. The cafe was no longer just a place of work for Eleanor, but a sanctuary where the unexpected family found strength and hope, where past sorrows were soothed by the promise of belonging, and where kindness created a light strong enough to illuminate even the darkest of paths. And as the seasons changed outside, so too did the lives intertwined within those walls, reminding all who crossed their threshold that love, in its purest form, is the greatest wealth one can possess, and that sometimes the most unexpected families are the ones that teach us how to truly live. Sophie had built her small cafe with more than just bricks and mortar. It was a sanctuary carved out of love, resilience, and the unyielding desire to provide a better life for her young son, Sam. Every morning, as frost clung stubbornly to the window panes and the first pale light of dawn spilled into the quiet streets, Sophie arrived early, long before the first customers, to light the ovens and prepare the day's batch of fresh bread, hearty soups, and comforting pastries. The cafe was modest but warm, filled with mismatched chairs and tables worn smooth by years of conversations, laughter, and quiet moments shared over cups of steaming coffee. The walls bore hand-painted murals, flowers, birds, and sunbeams that Sophie had crafted herself to chase away the chill that sometimes lingered in the air. For Sophie, it wasn't just a business. It was a place where stories intersected, where strangers found solace, and where she, a single mother, could nurture not only her son's dreams, but her own hope for a future beyond hardship. Sam was her constant joy and inspiration, a boy with wide, curious eyes and a smile that could brighten the darkest days. Despite the challenges of their small apartment and Sophie's relentless work schedule, she made sure Sam knew he was loved fiercely, more than any treasure or possession. Their mornings were filled with the sweet rituals of preparing for the day, Sophie humming softly as she brewed coffee, Sam sketching pictures on scraps of paper, his little hands smudged with charcoal and crayons, creating worlds where anything was possible. On one particularly biting winter afternoon, the snow fell thick and silent, muffling the city's usual clamor and blanketing the streets in a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. Sophie was arranging fresh flowers on the counter when the cafe door creaked open, admitting a gust of cold wind and an unfamiliar figure, a frail old man named Benjamin, whose eyes carried the weight of years filled with unspoken regrets and distant memories. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored overcoat and scarf, but the stiffness in his posture and the haunted look in his gaze told a story of loneliness that no amount of fine fabric could mask. Benjamin sat down in the corner of the cafe, far from the warmth of the kitchen but close enough to see the snow swirling outside, as if searching for something or someone in the swirling white. The hours stretched on and he remained silent, never ordering a drink or a bite to eat, simply staring out at the world beyond the frosted glass, his fingers tapping lightly on the wooden table as if trying to hold on to some fragment of the past. Sophie's heart tightened each time she glanced at him, the sadness in his eyes echoing a loneliness she recognized too well from her own life's struggles. She decided to bring him a warm bowl of soup, a simple gesture of kindness meant to comfort a soul who might otherwise go unnoticed. When she placed the steaming bowl before him, Benjamin's hands trembled slightly as he accepted it, his eyes misting, with a gratitude he could not put into words. Watching from nearby, Sam noticed the quiet exchange and felt an urge to reach out in his own small way. Without a word, he pulled from his pocket a crumpled drawing he had made earlier, a bright and hopeful picture of the sun shining over green hills. children playing together, and hearts connected by invisible threads. Sam carefully placed the drawing on Benjamin's table, hoping it might bring a spark of light into the man's shadowed world. Benjamin looked down, his breath catching as the colors and innocence of the drawing touched something deep within him. A memory of simpler, happier times, a glimpse of the kindness that still existed despite the distance that had grown between him and his own family. With a voice fragile yet earnest, Benjamin confided to Sophie that he was waiting for his son Daniel, a man who had risen to great heights as a CEO of a powerful company, but who had become a stranger to him over the years. Their relationship had frayed, tangled in arguments, misunderstandings, and pride that neither had managed to set aside. Daniel rarely came to visit, and Benjamin's heart ached with the loneliness of a father left on the sidelines of his son's busy life. What neither Sophie nor Benjamin knew was that Daniel himself stood just outside the cafe's frosted window, concealed in the shadow of the building, watching with conflicted emotions swirling in his chest. The visit to the cafe had been prompted by an argument with his father that had left both feeling wounded and distant. Daniel, despite his success and wealth, carried a gnawing emptiness, an emotional poverty that no amount of money could fill. This trip was a test, a way to observe his father from afar, to see if Benjamin could still be touched by the kindness of strangers, if there was a chance for their fractured relationship to heal. As Daniel's gaze lingered on the scene inside the cafe, he witnessed something he had never truly understood before, the quiet compassion that Sophie showed not just to his father, but to everyone around her, the genuine warmth with which she nurtured her son and welcomed others despite her own hardships. He watched Sam's innocent act of offering a drawing to a grieving stranger, a simple yet profound gesture that seemed to bridge the gap between generations and experiences. For the first time, Daniel felt a stirring of humility and recognition. The true wealth of life was not in power, possessions, or public success, but in these small moments of human connection and kindness. The clarity struck him like a lightning bolt, illuminating the cold emptiness he had allowed to grow inside. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped through the cafe door, the noise of the bell ringing out like a call to redemption. Benjamin's eyes widened with surprise, hope flickering in their depths as he looked up to see his son approaching. Sophie and Sam paused their tasks, sensing the significance of the reunion unfolding before them. Daniel moved slowly, the walls of pride and resentment he had built over the years crumbling as he reached out to his father, taking his hand with a trembling sincerity. The embrace that followed was tentative but full of promise, a bridge mended by tears, by unspoken apologies, by the courage to forgive and start anew. Sophie, witnessing this transformation, felt her own heart swell with a quiet joy. The cafe, once just a backdrop to their individual struggles, now became a place of healing and new beginnings. Inspired by the kindness and resilience she had shown, Daniel extended his support to Sophie and Sam, recognizing in them the true measure of success: love, compassion, and the strength to face life's challenges together. The snow continued to fall gently outside, its silent blanket covering the city with a sense of peace and renewal. Inside the cafe, the air was warm, filled with the soft hum of conversation, laughter, and the gentle clinking of cups. It was a space transformed, not by wealth or grandeur, but by the simple, profound power of kindness and connection. Daniel's journey, which had begun with pride and estrangement, ended here in this humble cafe, where a mother's love, a child's innocence, and a stranger's compassion taught him the most valuable lesson of all: that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in the hearts we touch and the bonds we nurture. And as the afternoon light softened into evening, Sophie looked down at Sam, whose smile mirrored the hope and promise of a brighter tomorrow, grateful that their small acts of kindness had become the catalyst for healing a family, and reminding everyone present that love, in its purest form, was the greatest gift one could give or receive. In a small, warmly lit cafe nestled on a quiet street corner, Emma, a selfless and determined single mother, wiped down tables while keeping a watchful eye on her young son Jack, whose laughter filled the modest space with a lightness Emma often felt slipping through the cracks of her own weary heart. Every day was a balancing act for Emma, juggling 2 jobs, stretching every dollar, and ensuring Jack had not only food and shelter but love and stability, despite the absence of his father, who had long since disappeared into the shadows of their past. One late autumn afternoon, As the golden light filtered through the cafe's windows and the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the soft murmur of conversation, the door opened to admit a figure who seemed almost out of place. A frail, elderly man with silver hair and kind, tired eyes that carried the weight of years spent in loneliness and sorrow. This was Mr. Henderson, a man who had escaped from the gilded cage of his son's sprawling mansion, where neglect had grown like a shadow over the corridors of his life, invisible to the outside world but suffocating in its quiet cruelty. Mr. Henderson shuffled slowly to the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he confessed softly to Emma, "I ran away. I felt like I was just a burden to him, to my own family." Emma, moved by the raw vulnerability in his voice and recognizing the familiar ache of loneliness in his eyes, invited him to sit, offering a warm meal for both him and Jack, who quickly took to the kindly old man, sensing the gentle soul beneath his weary exterior. As the three shared simple food and stories, an unlikely bond blossomed in that humble cafe. Jack's bright curiosity and laughter reignited a spark in Mr. Henderson's heart, while Emma's quiet strength and compassion wrapped around him like a balm, healing old wounds with new hope. Just as the afternoon sun began to wane, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, the cafe door burst open with a sudden urgency, and in strode David, an imposing figure in a sharp suit, carrying the air of power and influence as the CEO of a multinational company. His eyes, however, were clouded not with confidence but with desperation. David had been searching frantically for his father for days, worry gnawing at him as he realized that the man he had taken for granted had slipped away, physically and emotionally, from the life he thought he knew. Upon seeing Mr. Henderson sitting peacefully beside Emma and Jack, a look of disbelief softened his sharp features as he observed the warmth and contentment radiating from the trio, a stark contrast to the cold neglect his father had endured in the mansion's vast, empty rooms. In that quiet moment, David confronted a painful truth. Despite all his wealth and success, he had failed to cherish the one thing truly precious, his family. Moved by Emma's kindness and the genuine connection between her, Jack, and Mr. Henderson, David felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble. With a voice that trembled between regret and hope, he reached out to his father, who responded with a quiet nod, the distance between them shrinking with every shared glance. What began as a reunion grew into a healing journey, as David humbled himself to listen, to care, and to rebuild the fractured bonds of love and respect. And as days turned into weeks, David found himself drawn not only to his father's quiet resilience but to Emma's unwavering grace and strength, the woman who had welcomed a stranger and her son with open arms and had become the missing piece in his own fractured life. Together they forged a new family, built not on wealth or status but on kindness, understanding, and the profound realization that healing begins when we dare to open our hearts and see the people we love, not as burdens, but as the greatest gifts life can offer. In the quiet hum of a small cafe nestled in a modest neighborhood, Emma moved with practiced care between the worn tables, her hands steady despite the fatigue that weighed heavily on her soul. She was a selfless single mother, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders yet shielding her young son, Jack, from its harshest edges with a smile that belied the exhaustion etched into her features. Emma's life was a tapestry of sacrifice and love, working long hours as a waitress, managing the household on a shoestring budget, and nurturing Jack's bright spirit, determined to give him a childhood filled with warmth and hope, even though her own heart often felt hollow. Jack, with his wide eyes and infectious laughter, was her beacon of light, the reason she rose every morning despite the ache of loneliness and the nagging fear of never quite making ends meet. One chilly autumn afternoon, as the golden afternoon sun filtered softly through the cafe's windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors, the bell above the door tinkled, and in stepped a man who seemed fragile and out of place among the bustling regulars. He was elderly, with silver hair thinning at the temples and eyes that held stories of pain and isolation. This was Mr. Henderson, a man who had escaped from the gilded cage of his son's opulent mansion, a place where luxury masked the cold neglect he suffered day after day. For years he had lived like a ghost in his own home, ignored, forgotten, and made to feel like a burden by the very family that should have cherished him most. The weight of that neglect finally broke him, driving him to flee the confines of wealth that had brought him nothing but loneliness. Emma noticed his weariness immediately, The way his shoulders slumped, how his gaze flickered with a mix of fear and resignation. And without hesitation, she offered him a seat at her small table. "You look like you've been through a lot," she said gently, her voice a soft invitation in the cafe's warm hum. Mr. Henderson's voice was fragile as he confessed, "I ran away. I couldn't bear being a burden to my son anymore." Emma nodded, her heart aching with empathy she couldn't fully explain, while Jack tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mom." His eyes are sad. That innocent observation shattered the last of Emma's reserve, and she smiled warmly, assuring Jack and Mr. Henderson that here, they were safe and welcome. She fetched hot soup and bread, simple fare but prepared with genuine care, and as the three shared the humble meal, a fragile connection blossomed. Jack's curiosity and youthful energy breathed life into the tired old man's spirit, and Emma's nurturing presence wrapped around them both like a comforting blanket, a reminder that kindness could transcend hardship. Mr. Henderson's stories were quiet at first, small fragments of a life lived in silence, a family fractured by neglect and unspoken grievances. But as the afternoon wore on, his eyes brightened with a glimmer of hope, nourished by the warmth of genuine human connection. Just as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, the cafe door swung open again, this time with urgency. David Henderson, a man whose presence commanded attention even in the humblest of settings, strode inside, his tailored suit sharp but his expression troubled and raw with worry. As the CEO of a powerful company, David was used to control, influence, and decisive action. But here, in this modest cafe, none of that armor mattered. He was searching for his father, desperate after days without word, haunted by guilt over the distance that had grown between them. When he spotted Mr. Henderson sitting serenely with Emma and Jack, a look of disbelief softened his features. The man who looked so peaceful here was the father he had neglected, the man he had failed to see beyond the shadow of his own ambitions. In that moment, David's carefully constructed world shifted. The towering office buildings, the relentless meetings, the endless deals, all paled in comparison to the fragile family sitting before him. Emma's kindness, the bond she shared with Mr. Henderson and Jack, touched something deep inside David's heart, a reminder of the love and connection he had sacrificed on the altar of success. Without a word, David approached the table, the weight of his remorse pressing heavily on his chest. "Dad," he said simply, voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry." Mr. Henderson looked up, eyes moist but steady, and reached out his hand. "I'm glad you found me," he replied softly. Over the following days, David began the slow, painful work of rebuilding what had been broken, not just with his father but with himself and the world he had created. He spent time with Emma and Jack, learning the rhythms of a life grounded in love rather than power, discovering in Emma a strength and grace that challenged and inspired him. Their friendship deepened into something tender and real, a partnership forged not from convenience but from shared understanding and mutual respect. Emma saw in David a man transformed, shedding the burdens of pride and guilt to embrace the messy, beautiful complexity of family. Jack, ever perceptive, sensed the change too and welcomed David with open arms, hopeful for a future where his mother's happiness was no longer sacrificed. Through simple acts, a shared meal, laughter over spilled coffee, quiet moments of forgiveness, their lives intertwined, healing wounds that had festered in silence for far too long. David, once lost in his pursuit of success, learned that the true measure of a man was not his net worth but the love he cultivated, the kindness he showed, and the family he chose to cherish. Mr. Henderson, no longer alone or forgotten, found peace not in luxury but in the warmth of human connection and the gentle hands that tended to his spirit. And Emma, whose life had been a testament to resilience and grace, finally saw her sacrifices blossom into a new beginning, not just for her son, but for herself as well. In the quiet moments, as the sun set over the city and the cafe lights flickered on, their laughter mingled, a symphony of healing and hope, reminding them all that sometimes the greatest journeys start with a simple act of kindness and the courage to open one's heart. Lara had been working the late morning shift at the little neighborhood diner for nearly 3 years now, a small but steady source of income that kept a roof over her and her young son Finn's heads and food on their table. But more importantly, it was a place where she had forged a small community of regulars and fleeting strangers alike. people whose lives brushed hers in passing, leaving impressions that sometimes felt as fleeting as the steam rising from the coffee cup she carried. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Lara noticed the elderly man sitting alone by the window, the late autumn sun casting long shadows across his thin shoulders and weathered face. He didn't have the look of someone who belonged to the world rushing past the diner's doors, nor did he have any food or drink before him. His eyes, glassy and distant, seemed to carry a sorrow that went far beyond the loneliness of the moment, a deep-rooted pain that only years of isolation could carve into a person's soul. Lara's heart clenched as she watched him, reminded of the moments when she herself felt invisible, despite the noise of the world around her, of the times when being a single mother meant facing the weight of exhaustion and uncertainty, with little to no help. Her son Finn, a bright and curious 7-year-old with a mop of unruly brown hair, sat nearby, happily doodling on a napkin with the wide-eyed enthusiasm of a child who hadn't yet learned how hard life could be. Noticing her gaze, Finn looked up and caught the sight of the man too, his young face scrunching with concern. "Mom, why is that man sad?" he asked quietly, the innocence of the question piercing through the din of the diner and Lara's own swirling thoughts. She smiled softly, touched by his empathy, and said, "Sometimes people carry a lot of hurt inside. Maybe he just needs a little kindness today." Without hesitation, Lara slipped away from the counter, motioning for Finn to follow her as she gathered a warm plate of food from the kitchen. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and fresh green beans, the kind of simple comfort food she knew could brighten even the darkest of days. Approaching the man's table, she called softly, "Excuse me, sir, we noticed you didn't order anything. Would you like some food? It's on the house." The man looked up slowly, surprise flickering in his tired eyes before they softened into gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "You don't know how much this means." Lara and Finn sat with him briefly, sensing the importance of presence more than words. The man introduced himself as Mr. Davies, a widower who lived quietly in a small apartment nearby. Tears welled up as he spoke of his son, Chris, a successful CEO who had grown too busy for family, leaving him to face the silence of his later years alone. As Mr. Davies recounted the story of his estranged relationship, Lara's own struggles as a mother who worked tirelessly to provide without much support echoed in the background of her thoughts. She could feel the loneliness they shared, a loneliness born not of circumstance but of broken connections. Their quiet conversation was interrupted when the diner's door opened abruptly, and a sharply dressed man rushed inside, his eyes scanning the room frantically. It was Chris, Mr. Davies' son, whose world of corporate meetings and executive decisions had led him to neglect the very person who had given him life. His face, usually composed in boardrooms and business calls, now revealed raw emotion, worry, regret, and a desperate hope to bridge the gap his ambition had created. Seeing his father sitting with Lara and Finn, Chris was struck by the simple, unassuming act of kindness that had reached across the divide of years and silence. He approached, voice trembling. "Dad, I've been looking for you all day. I'm sorry I wasn't here." Mr. Davies looked up, tears spilling freely as years of separation and sorrow began to melt away in the presence of his son's genuine remorse. Lara watched as father and son embraced, the tension in the air dissolving into something fragile and beautiful. Forgiveness. Chris turned to Lara and Finn, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said earnestly, "for reminding me what really matters." From that day forward, Chris made a commitment not only to his father, but also to Lara and Finn, offering them support that was heartfelt and sincere. What began as a simple act of bringing a stranger a meal grew into a new chapter for all of them, a story of healing, family, and the unexpected ways kindness can change lives. Lara realized that despite the hardships she faced, the connections forged through compassion had the power to transcend social divides and mend even the most fractured of families. And in the quiet warmth of that small diner, under the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft murmur of conversations, 3 lives were forever intertwined by the kindness of strangers. Maria wiped her hands on her apron as the morning rush at the coffee shop began to settle, her eyes drifting toward a solitary figure seated near the fogged window, a frail, elderly man whose shoulders slumped under the weight of loneliness and years filled with unspoken regrets. His name was Mr. Wilson, a man who seemed almost invisible to the bustling city around him, his weary gaze lost in memories of a life where love had once thrived, but now lay buried beneath layers of neglect and isolation. Maria, a single mother who had known hardship yet carried a heart full of compassion, felt an immediate pull toward him, the kind of empathy that only those who have faced their own battles can truly understand. Her young son Leo tugged gently at her sleeve, sensing the sorrow that lingered like a shadow in the man's eyes. Without hesitation, Maria and Leo prepared a warm cup of tea and a freshly made sandwich, carrying them over with a quiet kindness that spoke louder than words. Mr. Wilson's eyes, tired and misty, lit up with a fragile hope as he accepted their gesture, and in that moment a connection was forged, a silent promise that even in the darkest chapters, kindness could be a beacon of light. As they sat together, sharing a modest meal amidst the hum of life around them, Mr. Wilson opened up about his son Jason, a powerful CEO whose relentless pursuit of success had left little room for family, leaving a chasm between father and son that neither had bridged in years. The arrival of Jason at the coffee shop was unexpected, his presence commanding yet uncertain as he sought his father, his eyes widening at the sight of the two strangers offering comfort and warmth to the man he had left behind. Confronted by the tangible evidence of his neglect and the genuine kindness of Maria, Jason felt a stirring within, a profound reckoning with the emptiness his wealth and power could never fill. The moment became a turning point, a gentle unraveling of pride and regret that led to a heartfelt reconciliation with Mr. Wilson and a newfound appreciation for the simple, enduring bonds of family. Inspired by Maria's selflessness and strength, Jason extended his hand not only to his father but also to Maria and Leo, weaving their lives together with generosity and love. Through this unexpected convergence of lives, a new beginning blossomed, one where the cold calculations of corporate ambition gave way to the warmth of human connection, where love and kindness reshaped priorities and healed old wounds. In the glow of this transformation, Maria found support and friendship, Leo found new role models, and Jason discovered a purpose beyond profit, a life rich with meaning and belonging, all sparked by a single act of compassion that bridged generations and changed their destinies forever. Maria stood behind the counter of the small, bustling coffee shop nestled in the heart of the city, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft murmur of early morning conversations and the occasional clink of ceramic cups. She had spent many mornings here juggling the demands of work and motherhood with a grace born of necessity. As a single mother to her spirited young son Leo, she understood exhaustion and hope in equal measure, carrying both with her through the daily grind. This particular morning felt heavier than most. Her gaze drifted toward the large window overlooking the busy street where the city's relentless rhythm played on, never pausing, never slowing. Near the window sat an elderly man, hunched over and isolated in a way that seemed to make the world blur around him. His name was Mr. Wilson, a figure so quiet and forlorn that for many he was almost invisible, just another face in the crowd. But to Maria, there was something profoundly human in the sadness that clouded his eyes and the slow, measured way he clutched his coat tighter, as if to shield himself from more than just the chill outside. She watched as he sipped his coffee slowly, his hands trembling slightly, betraying the frailty of his years and perhaps the weight of memories that refused to fade. It was a look that told stories of a life that had seen love and loss, joy and solitude, but most painfully, the aching absence of family. Leo, noticing the heavy silence that hung around Mr. Wilson, tugged gently on his mother's apron and whispered, "Why does that man look so sad, Mommy?" Maria knelt beside him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead, and whispered back, "Sometimes people carry invisible burdens, sweetheart, but kindness can help carry those burdens for a little while." With that thought, she gathered a small plate and prepared a warm sandwich, the kind Leo loved to eat, along with a cup of soothing herbal tea, hoping to offer not just nourishment but a small comfort to the lonely man. Together, mother and son approached Mr. Wilson's table with tentative smiles, their offering a simple gesture of human connection that transcended words. When Mr. Wilson looked up, surprised by their kindness, his eyes softened, and for the first time that morning, a genuine smile flickered on his lips. The three of them shared a quiet moment amid the hum of the coffee shop, the warmth of the tea and food mingling with the unspoken comfort of companionship. It was then that Mr. Wilson began to open up, his voice frail but steady, weaving a story of his son Jason, a powerful CEO whose life was a whirlwind of meetings, deadlines, and endless ambitions. He spoke of Jason's relentless pursuit of success, a journey that had taken him far from his father's side and left a chasm neither had dared to cross in years. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a poignant reminder of the sacrifices and regrets that often accompany the pursuit of wealth and status. Just as Maria and Leo listened intently, the door to the coffee shop swung open and Jason stepped inside, his presence commanding and unexpected. He scanned the room quickly before his gaze landed on his father, seated there with two strangers who radiated kindness and warmth. For a moment, the powerful CEO seemed caught off guard, his usual confidence faltering as he took in the scene before him. His aging father, once so strong and proud, now fragile and comforted by the gentle hands of a woman and her child. The room seemed to hold its breath as Jason approached, his eyes reflecting a storm of emotions: surprise, guilt, sorrow, and a dawning realization of what truly mattered. Maria, sensing the weight of the moment, stepped back respectfully, allowing the father and son space to bridge the years of silence and misunderstanding. As Jason knelt beside Mr. Wilson, the barriers of pride and regret began to crumble, replaced by tears, apologies, and the fragile threads of reconciliation. Witnessing this, Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest, a reminder that even in the coldest places, love could find a way to bloom again. But the story did not end there. Inspired by the kindness she had shown his father, Jason reached out beyond his immediate family, extending a hand to Maria and Leo, offering support and friendship that promised to change their lives as well. Together, they formed an unlikely bond, a blending of worlds where compassion and understanding transcended wealth and circumstance. For Maria, this connection meant more than financial assistance. It was an affirmation that she was not alone in her struggles, that her courage and kindness had created a ripple of change that touched even the most powerful. Leo found new role models in Jason, learning that strength could come in many forms and that success was richer when shared with those you love. Jason, once consumed by the cold calculations of corporate life, discovered a deeper purpose, a life where profit was measured not in dollars but in moments of genuine human connection. In the weeks and months that followed, the coffee shop became a symbol of new beginnings, a place where stories intertwined and lives transformed. Maria's simple act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power, capable of bridging generations, healing wounds, and lighting the way toward a future filled with hope and love. In a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, Maria, Leo, Mr. Wilson, and Jason found in each other a reminder that family is not always defined by blood alone, but by the compassion and care we offer to one another. And as the city moved on outside those coffee shop windows within those walls, a new chapter was unfolding, one written with kindness, redemption, and the promise of a new beginning.